Mathews is an avid researcher, consultant, and advisor, and has worked with a wide cross-section of industries, including academia, healthcare, law enforcement, K-12 education, transit, and state entities. To date, she has trained hundreds of professionals in the areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion, de-escalation, conflict management, customer service, and intergenerational communication. She's a wealth of knowledge. We're really excited to have her here with us today. With that, I will turn it over to Dr. Sacha Joseph Mathews.
Well, I am excited to be with everyone. And of course, my PowerPoint would not open. But why would we have anything else happening other than that? I mean, why would there be anything else happening?
So well, Dr. Sacha, can you send it to Sashi and then she can open it and
let me see and share it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
yep,
yeah, let me forward. Let me attach it. And
oh,
go ahead. Can you give me your email again? I don't seem to have it.
Yeah, it's green, GREEN.
Okay.
Guide. Yeah.
Got it.
And I just allowed multiple participants to share their screen, so I don't know if it'll work now.
Did you receive it?
Not yet.
Okay. All right. So in the meantime, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for coming and for joining us here today. And today we're going to talk about primarily this idea of what is DEI, what is DEIB, what is JEDI, what is IDEA. There's so many different ways that we have kind of discussed this acronym. And so as soon as Sachi receives it, she will share the screen. But in the meantime, I will just kind of cover what the idea is. Thank you, Tim, for such a wonderful introduction. When I'm talking to businesses, I try to have this discussion around three themes. The first theme is, what exactly is this thing called DEIB? The second one is, why should we even care? Why is this useful to us as an organization? And the third piece is, what are next steps? And that basically is the direction that I'll be taking today as well. Sachi, any, did you receive it as yet by chance? Yeah? Okay, good. We're in business. So she's gonna go ahead and share the screen so that we can see the graphics. I think. Yes?
Sorry, my computer's.
We have to talk to Tim about that. We really do.
We need Max. We need MacBooks.
We need Max. So the first image you're going to see is one that kind of demonstrates the idea behind DEIB, because it's this concept of looking at what it is what is kind of like a standard perception of this issue of DEI. And so a lot of times people have a misconception. What is diversity? Why do we even need it? Okay, good. We see the image coming up here. Good. And so if we went to that fourth slide, Sachi, that's where that's the image I really want people to see. Good. And we could go into presentation mode. Thank you. So diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. What do these things look like for you, right? So this first issue is the reality. And this is what I really need people to kind of understand, is that currently in the world we live in the United States of America, regardless of which county we're in, what city, rural, suburban neighborhood we are at, many people have more than they need and many people have less than they need. That's the reality of what we're living in. And I think there's a lot of conversation around equality versus equity, where equality is this notion that if we just give everyone the same support, they will all do well. And you can see from this image that is not necessarily the case, right? That based on what we show up to the table with, we already have, in many instances, more than we need, and many people are operating from a deficit. So us giving everyone the same level of support is not necessarily as effective as we might have thought. What we really want to strive towards is this idea of equity. How can we give our customers, our stakeholders, our employees the support that they need in order for everyone to have equal access? And then, of course, this idea of justice is where we take away the barriers altogether so that it is much easier for you to have access in your state. And if I go back to this equity, this equality piece, you know, I have a good friend who's in a wheelchair, and she will often say to me, you know, when you're explaining equality, just use my example of stairs. I'm in a wheelchair, you are not. We both are given stairs in order for us to access this house. You can utilize those stairs, I cannot. And so just giving us both the same amount of support is often not enough for us to be successful. So we can move to the next slide. But we are going to focus on the acronym. So I'm going to describe and explain what is in this acronym, right? Let's talk about diversity. And diversity, I think for a very long period of time, really was what was that was a topic of conversation. Everybody was focused on, do we have enough, a variety of different kinds of people coming into our organizations? What are our organizations going to look like? Can they look like, can our employees resemble, mirror, who our customers are? So we really were focused for a long time on who we have in the room. Do we have a diverse set of players in the room? And I think in California, we can say we are heading there on our way to that. I'm going to show you some of the statistics. But I think we are moving past just this diversity piece. And the next piece that we really want to focus on are the issues of equity, the issues of inclusion, and really this issue of belonging. So I often will use the example of a dance, and I say diversity is in being invited to the dance. And so for a long time, we were sending out invitations like crazy, right? We want to get as many people to the dance as possible. But now that they've come there, what next? What are our opportunities? So I get to the dance and I think the music is whack. I think the food is whack. Nobody's asking me to dance. And so that's not ideal. We don't want to have organizations where we have so many diverse opinions around the table, but we never bother to ask these opinions. What do you think? How can you contribute to the conversation? And so that's where the inclusion and belonging piece comes in, right? Someone's showing up. Are we asking them to dance? What have we provided? Have we considered them when we were planning the event? The food, decorations, the music, did we consider them so that they can feel included? But, you know, that's the one piece on our part. What are we doing to include? But then the other piece is the belonging piece. And if that inclusion goes beyond the performative, then people start feeling a sense of belonging, right? They start feeling as if I'm going to go there because I know I will hear my song. Someone will ask me to dance. I will feel as if I am valued, that people wanted me to show up, that people wanted me to enjoy myself. And then that piece of equity is really around, on my way to this dance, you know, do I think about the fact that I was involved in the planning of it? I had an opportunity to say what the dance would be like, just as much as the other people that were attending the dance. And so how are we building into our everyday processes and procedures these 4 components? Okay, next slide. So, Sachi, next slide. I don't know. Did we freeze? Oh, there we go. And the next one. So this idea of why is DEI important? We can move to the next slide. Why is DEI important? Why is this landscape something that is even a topic of conversation. Well, let's do the numbers, right? So you see here, California very shortly will move to what we call a minority state, meaning there's no one real majority because we have such high groups of minorities here, right? So 35% of the population identifies as white, 39% as Hispanic or Latino or Latinx, 5% Black, 1% American Indian and Alaska Native, 16% Asian, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, 8.4% other, and then 4% two or more races, right? So next slide. We know that we have the diversity already, but in California, you know, immigrants and children of immigrants represent about 83% of the working age population. That is a very high population. And so even though currently we know that the Caucasian population is the largest ethnicity in the US, that population is decreasing. And more importantly, I think, is look at the growth that we're having in our non-white populations, right? And so what we know is, as businesses, this is an opportunity that we have to take advantage of. And to just give you an example, next slide, please. I have a colleague who had a business up in Sacramento. And he does training, he does safety training. And for as long as the business existed, maybe the business is about 50 years old, they have always done all of their training in English, in person and in English. And when the pandemic hit, he recognized that he needed to go online. And in talking with some consultants, they said, well, do you have any training in Spanish that's being done in Spanish? And he was like, I didn't even think about it. Well, now that he has developed Spanish training, 60% of his business comes from the Latino population. 60% of the training that he never did before the pandemic. 60% of his business is now coming from this population that he never even thought about accessing before. So I think I really want to emphasize that when we talk about JEDI, DEIB, IDEA, and we, you know, all of these names, all of these acronyms speak to not just the diversity piece, but the inclusion and the intentionality. But look at the numbers, right? 1 in 4 individuals in California have a disability. And I like to talk about kind of the non-traditional areas and opportunity for diversity, right? 1 in 10 Californians are members of the LGBTQ plus IA community, with 50% identifying as bisexual. We don't really often think about these numbers. 1 in 5 Californians will be 65 or older by 2030. And there are all kinds of intergenerational dynamics that are happening in our workplaces and workspaces every single day. 1 in 4 Californians are foreign born. We also don't talk about the stresses of workplace dynamics when someone is working in an environment and speaking a language that is not their first tongue. What are the opportunities for misunderstanding that can happen amongst colleagues? 4% of Californians are veterans. We have the highest, we have one of the highest veteran populations in the United States. And 1 in 3 Californians are neurodivergent. And we're going to talk about what that means, because businesses really, I think really, when I do my training, this is the area that we are so unprepared for. So yes, absolutely. I'm going to send out this PowerPoint. Tim will send it out, or Sachi will send it out, so we will have access to it. Next slide, please. So I wanted to kind of dig a little bit deeper into, you know, what these statistics mean, because of course we know we are seeing growth in these minority populations. Black employees growing by 26%, Latinx employees growing by almost 100%, even female employees growing by almost 20%. And what, you know, the US Census Bureau, they were forecasting, I want to say back in 2010, that by 2050, there will be no ethnic majority in the United States. In California, we're already there. And the United States, they are scheduled to reach it now by 2030, not 2050. So diversity is here to stay. And we in the San Joaquin Valley in particular have some of the most diverse populations in all of the United States. So what do I mean when we talk about DEIB? Diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Or IDEA, where we talk about inclusion, diversity, equity, and access. Next slide, please. So when we talk about, next slide, when we talk about these areas, what are the specific areas of DEIB? Well, neurodiversity, right? And neurodiversity is, as I mentioned before, this is one of those areas where there's so much opportunity for growth. And in this graphic, you can see these are all of the little things that come up. 1 in 3 Californians are neurodivergent. Next slide, please. What does that mean exactly? Well, this is a term, right? It was coined by a sociologist in the kind of mid-90s, where they really wanted to educate folks on all of the differences of the mind that we bring as a population, we bring to the table. And so think of it as the diversity of human brains and minds, right? The variation in neurocognitive functioning within humankind. And so when we talk about neurodiverse conditions, we're talking about ADHD, autism, dyslexia, Tourette syndrome, all of these things that is actually quite common, but we never really think about that. And so what does that mean to have a neurodivergent employee in your organization? Well, if we have people who are autistic, someone who maybe is on the spectrum in your organization, are you ready to manage such an employee? Are your managers equipped with the knowledge of how to train this person? And I can let you know, having neurodivergent students, that they are some of my smartest and most dedicated students. But I couldn't teach them in the same way that I would teach non-neurodivergent students, because their mind works differently and they process information differently. That doesn't mean that this difference is a negative. It simply means that it is different. And I think often this is one of the biggest challenges that we have in California, right? Because we often think of ourselves as so evolved in our understanding of diversity that we don't have unconscious bias. And I'm not really going to get in too deeply into unconscious bias today, simply because we only have so much time. But when you have very diverse spaces, and when you have actively recruited diverse customers or diverse employees, then what you are doing is you are creating an environment where there is an opportunity for more conflict, simply because as you increase diversity, you increase how people see the world and the differences in the ways that they see the world. That is not a bad thing. In fact, you will see from the data, that is a very good thing. However, we often just focus on the good part of it, meaning it increases innovation, productivity, creativity, all of the above, and we're going to discuss that. But what it does, it also creates an opportunity for conflicts if we don't, one, make a concerted effort to be aware of where we may have biases, because there are people who are different in our organization and who we are working with. And also, if we don't make an attempt to understand how people think because of their different backgrounds, because of the differences in how their minds operate. And so, for example, if we think of, something as simple as ADHD, and both of my daughters have ADHD. And I was working with an organization where I was doing a diversity training, and one of the newer and younger members of staff came to me and she was like, Dr. Sacha, I'm so glad that you brought up this idea of being neurodivergent, because I have ADHD. And 2-hour meetings are so difficult for me, especially if people are coming into the meeting with no agenda, or they're asking me for things on the spot in the meeting. And I know, and this is a convolution of two things happening here. One, ADHD, and two, intergenerational dynamics, right? Because when we talk about intergenerations, we have 5 generations currently in the workforce. And we can start off with, I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you. When I send out the slides, I'll also have a slide on this. But we start off with our traditionalists, and traditionalists right now about 75 plus. Next, we have our boomers who are about 55 to 75. Then comes our Xers, that's me. We are early 40s to late 50s, mid to late 50s. Then we have our millennials. Our millennials are in 2 categories. We have our younger millennials that are like 25 to 35. Then we have our older millennials that are known as Yers, and they are from about 35 to early 40s. Then last but not least, our last generation in the workforce right now are Zers. And Zers, I'm going to pray for all of you, because Zers, they run from 12 up to 25. So why do I bring up this generation? Because we know from the data that they are more younger generations who have higher, in our younger generations, we have higher incidences of neurodivergency occurring. So she is a young woman who's working in this organization, and she's saying, I have such anxiety when I'm called upon in a meeting, and I didn't know that I was going to be called upon, and I'm not prepared. Plus, I process things much slower than many of my colleagues, so it's a little bit different. So she's like, my manager is managing in the way she would typically manage her peers, which in this instance would probably be Xers, who really don't have the same levels of anxiety. Yes, we can put the PowerPoint in the chat, who really don't have the same level of anxiety that maybe a Zer may have, or even a millennial may have. So I say that because I really want us to understand that as we talk about diversity and as we bring up topics like neurodivergency, then we also have to be aware that this may be much more commonplace in certain aspects of our employee base, in certain aspects of our consumers. So how are we presenting information to our employees? How are we presenting information to our customers? So as we think about diversity, my job is to kind of help us understand it's not just our typical race, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic background. There's so many components. Next time. And we're going to talk about kind of all of the various different types of diversity, because it's so important. Ableism is another key area that I don't think we think about typically when we think about diversity. It's not at the forefront of our mind, but 50 million Americans have a disability. We can go back up to that previous slide. 50 million Americans have a disability, 88% of which are not visible. This is a big, big deal for me, because 1 in 4 Californians have a disability. 1 in 4. 1 in 4. Okay. And so, and many of those, actually, I think that number is more like, those were, I think older numbers. I think now it's like 1 in 3 Californians have a disability, and many of those are neurodivergent disabilities. So think about how pervasive that is in organizations, amongst our customers, amongst our employees, right? And most of those disabilities you can't see, so we have no idea about. So I think when we talk about that, how many of us in our organizations have Braille signage? I mean, I think a lot of us think, when we think of ability and ableism, we think of, okay, do I have a ramp to my organization? Do I have parking? And we think of the ADA, right? The American Disability Act. But what I'm saying is beyond that, not just physical disabilities, but mental disabilities, but also from a physical disabilities, how many of us have signage in Braille? How many of us have kind of thought about how do we present information to our customers? What is the format? Are we giving our customers the opportunity to process information at their pace, self-paced data, or are we doing a lot of our information disseminating at kind of fixed pace data? So we're doing a lot of things where they're interacting with it pretty quickly. So it's something to think about. How are we serving our customers with disabilities? Okay, we can move to the next slide. And these are all of the various different ways that we can think about disabilities and abilities and just diversity in general, nationality, what state are people from, what even within your organization, do some departments have more access than other departments? What are people's experiences? Education. When I work with a lot of organizations, they often talk about people who don't have a first degree feel as if they are being prejudiced against when compared with their degree colleagues. And are we making this movement to make jobs that do not really require a degree, to put degree requirements on it, and then by extension, ice out entire cross sections of the population? Sexual orientation, differently abled, all these things, technical background, first language, so forth and so on. So these are what we call dimensions of difference. And so I just want to kind of encourage everyone to think maybe outside of the box of how we typically think about diversity, right? Next slide, please. So as we talk about this issue of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, I want us to kind of understand why it's important. We have somewhat of a idea based on the stats, but I really want to emphasize that in 2023, a diverse economy is a strong economy. We know from the data that businesses that embrace changing demographics really do benefit from that approach to inclusion. Businesses that recruit a diverse workforce are better able to obtain the best and brightest talent. And I think that really is something that we have to be aware of. That's a huge part of it, where I want people to understand it's not just kind of a humanistic thing for us to go out and find a diverse workforce. It's not just, oh, we're doing the right thing as we go out and we try to seek diverse employees. First to begin with, we are really giving ourselves a huge advantage as we have diverse employees, because we have diverse customers. So we want to mirror out, because the research tells us that our customers want to see themselves reflected in the workforce that they're interacting with. But more importantly, by expanding to a diverse workforce, we're getting the best talent out there. Why would we want to limit our talent pool to only one component of the population? Can we really do our best work when we are only tapping into the same sources of labor that we have always tapped into? No, because the more we are expansive in how we approach talent recruitment and talent retention, the more likely we will reap the benefits of such a wide cross-section of talent. Next slide, please. So we look at bringing this variety of backgrounds, skills, experiences into our businesses so that people can think differently. People can see problems differently. They can solve problems differently. And having a more diverse workforce allows us to, kind of bring together the best of all minds, regardless of how they identify, what their backgrounds are, what their experiences are, what their lifestyle is, regardless of those things. And I think I really want us to really move beyond that. And, the next step, next slide, the next step to it is this idea that the excellence comes with the need for additional training, right? So these are the numbers. These are the components that kind of tell this story. when we look at companies that are racially and ethnically diverse, what we know is that the performance is higher, 35% higher likelihood of financially outperforming companies with no diversity. That is not a small amount of difference. That's not, as we say in academia, that is, well, as we say in the Valley, that's hell of a percentage right there, right? Because we're talking about 35% more in terms of performance. You're outperforming to the tune of 35%. That's significant. And we know when we even break down those diversity components, whether it's gender, you outperform at 15%. But more importantly, in addition to the outperformance, is that our ability to really attract the best of the best, we have to have this diverse workforce, because 67% of job seekers today, they want to work with a diverse workforce. And employees who are existing employees, they also want to work with a diverse workforce. And we know inclusive teams, they outthink their non-inclusive competitors. So decisions made and executed by diverse teams deliver better results. So you get better outcomes, right? The thinking process itself is better. Your work, your employee group is going to be more creative, more innovative, higher profitability. All of these things, why would we want to do it? Next slide. So I think we've made the case for diverse employees, right? We've made the case for a diverse workforce. We know that a diverse workforce outperforms a homogeneous one. But I really do want to caution about the need for training, because as we have this more diverse workforce, then what are we doing to educate the workforce about bias? So bias is this idea that our minds are a result of our environments that we have been culturalized into our entire life, right? So in California, I think one of the challenges that I often have when I'm doing diversity trainings are these two big elephants in the room. One, everyone thinks that they have a Black friend, a gay neighbor, and a half Filipino cousin. And so because of that, they do not think that they are biased, because they've been exposed to all different types of folks. But what I often say is, I think the United States, we like to say that we're a melting pot, but we really are more like a salad. And because of that, I'm a pineapple in the salad, and Miles is a strawberry, and I am not becoming more strawberry-ish hanging out with Miles, and Miles is not necessarily becoming more pineapple-ish just hanging out with me. And what does that mean? It means that I think we believe that just being in someone's presence allows us to understand their situation and their experiences and how they traverse the world. And that is just not the case, right? So having grown up in an environment where my best friend was Muslim and I went to the mosque every Friday and she went to Catholic church with me on a Sunday, that allowed me to have a really intimate understanding of what it means to be Muslim and what it is like to go and experience Eid and celebrate that with my Muslim brothers and sisters. My daughter's best friend is Muslim. She's not going to the mosque. She's not going to their house to celebrate Eid. And I say that because if now I am working with someone who's Muslim, but I really don't understand Islam, and I have never had these intimate experiences where I celebrate Eid al-Fitr with them, or I have been over to their house for iftar dinner, then in the workplace, there's an entire part of their experience that I am so unfamiliar with and that I may have questions about, but maybe I don't think it is applicable or even relevant to a workplace environment. And what that means is that this person cannot show up with their entire self to that workplace, right? That they have to close off part of who they are and what they believe in when they come to work. And I'm here to kind of challenge that traditional way of thinking to say, I want you to bring your entire self to work. I want you to feel as if you can be comfortable to, to engage in your entire identity fully in the workplace, because what that is going to allow me as your colleague to do is to better understand you, to really appreciate how you see the world, to be able to engage with you on a more personal level, to be able to really appreciate, understand, herald, and admire your decision-making process. So, and it allows you to bring your out-of-the-box thinking to problems that we may have at work. Because maybe there's something in your culture that may help you to see how to solve a problem in our work environment. And, I would often say, when I was teaching, my experiences as a Black woman allowed me to identify with my students' experiences from various different cultures. My experiences as an immigrant allows me to identify with my students' experiences. So if we are talking about from a business perspective, right? And we are talking about, okay, so maybe we want to do a partnership with a bank. And then I may say, well, yeah, we want to do a partnership with a bank, but what other partnerships are we doing? Because maybe 50% of our customers don't have banks, right? They are unbanked or they are underbanked. So maybe if we only do this partnership with this bank, then we may not be able to access all of our customers. And maybe the only reason I have that understanding is because I have parents who are underbanked and so forth and so on. So I think that as we think about, how we see diversity, and as we try to expand our diverse populations that we interact with, whether it's a workforce or it's a customer base, I really want us to think about training around unconscious bias and how we're having these conversations inside our businesses to say, hey, our brain is kind of hardwired to be biased about people who are different to us. And so how are we counteracting that with training so that we don't infuse bias into our day-to-day interactions with our colleagues and customers? And how are we looking at existing practices, policies, and procedures for bias? Okay, next slide. So this is, and I think, Sacha, you had to enable content in order for the for it to play. Does it play? Is it playing? I think you probably have to come out of this and enable content for this to play. But this is just simply a quick video on inclusion and being kind of open to it. And then we're going to wrap up and have just opportunity for me to answer questions that folks may have about, DEIB, JEDI, IDEA, et cetera, et cetera. Is it working?
We're working on it
It's okay
right now.
So maybe before, as we're waiting on the video, so if you go to the top of your PowerPoint, you will see something that says enable content. And then that should allow you to be able to play the video. But do we have any questions in the chat that maybe came up?
Put them in the chat or the Q&A. Either one.
Or the Q&A. Maybe we can do the Q. I'm not seeing anything in the Q&A yet.
If anybody has anything, you can raise a hand too.
Yeah. I got a question.
Go ahead.
Several.
Go ahead, Miles.
So amazing information and content. As a small business owner, I've got employees. One of the challenges that I uncovered in your presentation really spoke to the individual with ADHD. Because on a larger scale, as a small business owner, I know I can't in an interview process ask, hey, what's your health? For HIPAA rules and things of that nature. So I would never know unless a staff person, well, regardless if I'm a small business owner or large, I would never know that a member of my staff has those biodiversity issues. And then because I don't know what I don't know, how would I know that my morning sales meetings, my afternoon, how would I know to even be able to address the various diverse issues that could be in my employee base that I don't know? I mean, I'm looking at Tim and I'm thinking Tim's got employees. How would he ever know unless someone actually came in, and you were lucky that a person came up to you and said, hey, I'm one of those individuals that suffers. But if you just, how do you even go about creating an environment that could be inclusive? I don't even know if I'm asking it right, but you're
No,
shaking your
you
head. So I
are, you
think-
are. This
okay,
is like the
so
number
I'll
one
just-
question I get from businesses, right? They say to me, okay, Dr. Sacha, so you are saying someone might have this and it's an invisible disability that I would not know about. So how can I ask? And then, you know, people will say, so do I just sit back and wait for someone to come and tell me that they have this? And what I say is, if we are creating a culture of inclusion, if we from the jump say to our staff, let us know how we can better serve your needs. If you have ADHD, or if we want to know so that we can be more inclusive, but still knowing that you might not know, then there are small things that you can do to be able to help folks with ADHD. One of the things about ADHD is the attention deficit piece, right? So the difficulty of staying in long meetings. So we can just schedule our meetings 1 hour long. And if we need 2-hour meetings, we put a break in there, and we are intentional about having breaks in our meetings, because we know not everyone can have the attention to be fully present for a 2 or 3 hour session. So we break it up. Also, we don't do any meetings without agendas, right? So that coming in, people know what to expect. We are always intentional about forwarding PowerPoints or details that we will need for the meetings in advance, in as much advance notice as possible, so people have time to review. So we're not putting them on the spot in the meeting to review and come up with an assessment at that point in time. So things like that. And so, you know, even something like, I just saw someone talk about closed captions, and I think, I don't know, typically, because we had some technical difficulties, I have it on my computer, but it's not always an immediate function in what you would call this thing, in PowerPoint. Is something you have to click on. So just being kind of thoughtful, Miles, about those kinds of things in advance, right? Knowing that everyone here is not operating the same way. So we're intentional around thinking about how we can be inclusive. Does that make sense? Does that help?
Yeah, and I still struggle a little bit, because I know that some of the potential for the challenges that individuals might have plays into, I don't want to let someone know I've got A, B, or C, because I don't want to be
singled out or treated differently. Exactly.
Well, I want that next promotion, but if I say that I have A, B, or C,
right, then maybe they will think, yeah, well, do we
I'm
want to give it to the
capable
ADHD
of,
person?
so-
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. There you go. And so that's why I'm saying, if we try to have some general practices that are inclusive, so this person doesn't feel as if, God, I'm gonna have to say something because I just can't manage in this meeting for 2 hours. Well, what if we just don't have 2-hour meetings? Or if we have 2-hour meetings, we have an intentional break in between, where we say, okay, we know that's a lot, so we're going to take a break. You're going to allow people to stretch, and then we come back in 10 minutes so that everyone can decompress. Sometimes we have people who will do some kind of simple meditational activities before or during their meeting to help people relax, to help people to understand, and those kinds of things, right? So I think those are some small things that have big impacts, if that makes sense.
I see Johnny's question, so I'll leave it at that, because I was going to get into professional training of how do I train my leadership team who might have people that they oversee. But Johnny has a really good question, so I'll let someone else ask a question. So fantastic information, though.
I'm looking at Johnny's question now. My question is, how do you approach training in professional organizations that have fixed mindsets and not aware of the complexity of DEIB, etc., specifically law enforcement? This is extremely relevant to build public trust. One of the, thank you, Joni, for that. One of the, I think, biggest challenges is this notion of, in California, and particularly prevalent in law enforcement, is I am not biased. I treat everyone the same. I treat everyone equal. I grew up in a diverse community. I have a Black neighbor, a half Filipino cousin, a gay cousin, you know, and so forth and so on, so that we think we are unbiased. And secondly, we think that even if we are, that because we are intentional about our unbiasedness and we are good people, we don't want to examine this idea of being unbiased, because that's bad people. Bad people are biased. And so the first step is to really make a space in the organization to explain to people, one, we are all biased. You know, Oprah says, you get a car, you get a car, you get a car. You get to be biased, you get to be biased, I get to be biased. We are all biased. So that's the first step to awareness. And secondly, is for us to recognize we all see color, we all see gender. We have these biases built into who we are. The problem is not so much that we have the bias, because we all have the bias. We were born with, well, we weren't born with it, but over time you accumulate it based on your exposure to media, your exposure to people, your family life. You become biased in this world. But what are we doing about it? That is a big thing. But I think in these organizations, the first step is for us to really kind of take people away from this idea that being biased means you're a bad person, so that they can open up to learn about their biases and do something about them. Because if we continue to think that we are not biased, how can we ever change? How can we ever do anything to expose ourselves? So that's the big step, to really take away the stigma that being biased is bad, but just helping people to understand. Now, the second part of that, and I think, Johnny, that is where there's the most amount of growth, is to really dig deep in the organizations to demonstrate how incredibly influenced our decision making is by our biases. So, for example, they did a study that looked at symphony conductors. And if you talk to any symphony conductor and you say to them, why aren't there more people of color, women, etc., in any symphony in the United States, they will all tell you, well, not a lot of women and people of color are into classical music or want to play in symphonies, which is completely untrue. But that's a narrative, right? And we know that one of the major reasons why we don't have more women and people of color in symphonies is because there's bias. But no symphony conductor will ever think that the reason is because they are biased. And so they did this experiment where the only thing they didn't go into schools and start training people on classical music or give people scholarships to go to university to study classical music. You know what they did? They did blind auditions. So they curtailed a symphony conductor's ability to see who was playing the instrument. And from that one guardrail, what happened? Well, the number of people of color and the number of women increased by 50%. 50%. So what is that telling me? That is telling me that a lot of folks, a lot of symphony conductors were using sight to affect their decision making, right? Despite what they themselves feel, you can't increase by that percentage simply based on we can't see. So we're doing blind auditions, and now all of a sudden we've increased who we've chosen, because affinity bias is real. And that is this idea where you have something in common with me, and so I identify with that, and I'm naturally biased towards that affinity, and that is real. So I really think that idea of kind of recognition of, you know, one, telling people, we're not attacking you by talking about bias. We're not saying you're a bad person. This is just, you know, part of life. We are all biased. So now how can we create these opportunities to learn about our biases and to make the organization aware of where bias is showing up? And that's the other piece that I think is the big part that is never discussed. How are we auditing the institutional biases in our organizations? So, I play this I typically play, and when we do the webinar on unconscious bias, I will come back, and I promise to do that one again, Tim, and talk about how biases show up in the workplace. Well, there's this one clip that I show where these two ladies, actually two in-laws, both of them Black, but one looks white. And so the white cousin goes to the supermarket, does her grocery shopping, pays for it with a check. So it's a long time ago this was happening, and steps to the side. And then the Black cousin comes up, does the same thing. And from the beginning, there is a difference in terms of the interaction. The interaction is not as friendly. But then the cashier asks, okay, can you give us 2 forms of ID with this check? Can you? And then they go in the bad checkbook and they're looking up the names and blah, 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 blah. And when the white appearing cousin steps back in and says, why are you doing this? Why are you putting her through these trials? The cashier says, I'm not doing anything. I'm just following policy. And the other cousin says, but you didn't follow. Are you following policy? Because you didn't ask me when I presented my check. You didn't ask me to do any of these things that you are asking her to do. And the employee says, but that's because I know you. And she says, no, you don't. I've only just started coming to the supermarket. My cousin here has been coming for over a decade. So I say that because there's an opportunity for us to look at something that is institutionalized into the organization that is biased. And how are we looking at these processes and identifying them as opportunities to grow? And I think I just saw another question. What is JEDI? So JEDI is the same as DEI or DEIB, meaning it is justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And companies that use JEDI, they say they prefer JEDI because it looks at justice first. And so it's just another acronym for DEIB. But I think there is also a hand that went up in the chat.
Sorry, last question here for Dennis.
Yes, that's the last question.
I just unmuted you, so you can go ahead and ask your question.
If you unmute yourself, Dennis. If not, you can type it in the chat. Can I share your contact information in the chat?
Yeah.
Sacha, okay.
Yes.
All right, go ahead, Dennis. Looks like you're off mute. There you go.
Hi, Dennis.
Hi.
All right. Did you have a question?
You have a question?
Oh, did I put my hand up?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, Dennis, you put your hand up.
It's just a comment.
Okay.
How do I put it? Just like with Miles, I think a lot depends on the type of business that he has. And so I think to address the issues, there's so many. So each one is different.
Right.
And so I don't think that, I think you're making certain comments about the advantages of DEIB, and I think it just depends on the individual and the business. Like Miles' business, I don't know what business he has, but I think it determines how diversity would work. And I'm learning quite a bit. This is I'm just starting an organization, and this is another thing that I have to repair So I take it after the Jewish, repair the world, but I'm trying to repair the communities first. And so I have a certain approach to it, and it's being positive. So everything I try to do is being positive.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so, well, I think the extent of the diversity makes it a challenge. Because, when you tack on all the different things, I was just thinking of more cultural and race than anything else.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm rambling a little bit.
Thank
So
you.
I
Thank
could
you so
probably
much.
answer questions better than I can make a remark. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Dennis. All right. All right. So yeah, with that, we're just up at 1 o'clock. Do you have
Yeah.
any last words, Sasha, before I wrap it up?
Well, I just want to say that, I thanks to everyone. My door is always open. I think Tim put in there, you could always email me, or feel free to come by and see me down at Stanislaus State. And I'm always up to the challenge of working with organizations and helping organizations however I can. But this is a deep passion of mine, and this is something the Chamber and Guide is very committed to. And we're going to be hosting a number of these. I'm kicking it off, but we have some great speakers through the series. I promised him that I'm going to come back and do the unconscious bias, but we have a whole bunch of other topics that we're going to be talking about: neurodiversity, veteran status. So there's a lot for people to learn. So stay tuned and make sure you tell other businesses about what we're doing at the Chamber.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sasha, for joining us today. Every time I hear you present and hear you talk to you, I learn something new and just think about something new. Just the way you're able to communicate with it's amazing. Just their knowledge and everything. So I really appreciate you coming and really sharing your expertise with us today. And we look forward to continue working with you.
Thank you so much. And I shouting out to Megan, who is one of my MBA students, and Alyssa, who's also one of my students who's on the call. So hey to folks who everyone was there. But thank you again. Thank you so much.
All right, before we wrap up here, got two quick announcements. We had a couple upcoming events. Next week, Wednesday, October 25th, we're having a 20-year anniversary ribbon cutting for California Mentor. They serve the intellectually and developmentally disabled community here in Stockton. They're celebrating 20 years. I'll put the link in the chat there. So yeah, if you want to join us, it's next Wednesday, like I said, October 25th at 11 a.m. If you click on the link there, you can find their address over on West Marsh Lane. It's going to be great to hear from them. And then that kind of rolls into our part 2 of our webinar series is going to be coming up on Tuesday, November 14th at noon. We're going to hear from Valley Mountain Regional Center about all their DEI program. They implemented a fantastic DEI program for their employees. They have a lot of employees, but they've been doing a great thing. So they're going to kind of talk about their process, what they're doing, and then they're going to talk about, who they serve, because they're Valley Mountain Regional Center. They serve the developmentally disabled as well. So they're going to talk about inclusion for that and kind of tips on how we can go about thinking about different things, because they work with that community all the time. So we're really excited for that. And then in January, we're going to have another one on inclusion for veterans. So we just ran over a little bit time here. So I want to really thank everybody for coming. We'll email out link to sign up for the next webinar here. And I'll follow up maybe a quick poll, and then Sashi will get out the PowerPoint as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Sachi's going to send out a PowerPoint to everyone who attended. And so let me know if you all have questions. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. I appreciate it. Thank you, guys. I hope you all have a great weekend.
Bye.